The stagecoach door swung open, and Clara Whitmore stepped into a town that didn't want her, but a cowboy who'd been counting stars since April knew she was coming. She took the midnight job at his ranch, thinking it was about horses. She had no idea Elias Cade had been preparing a cabin in the meadow, had been waiting with a ring his dying mother pressed into his palm, had been praying for the woman in the newspaper ad to be her. Tonight, everything would change. Stay with me until the end of this journey and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's story has traveled across the world. The February wind cut through Clara Whitmore's threadbare coat like a promise of suffering. She pressed her gloved hands, more holes than fabric now, against the frosted window of the stagecoach as it lurched over another rut in the mountain road. Through the ice-crystallized glass, she could see the town emerging from the gray afternoon like a memory half forgotten. Weathered buildings with painted signs, smoke rising from chimneys, horses tied to hitching posts, their breath making ghosts in the cold air. Willow Bend. The end of the line. The end of everything she'd known, and perhaps, if luck hadn't abandoned her entirely, the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. "This your stop, miss?" The driver's voice carried the gravel of too many years fighting wind and wilderness. He didn't look at her when he spoke, just kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, where the town spread itself across the valley like a tired gambler's last hand. "Yes." Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat, tried again. "Yes, this is my stop." The driver grunted. "Ain't much here for a lady traveling alone. You got family in Willow Bend?" "I have a job." Clara touched the folded newspaper in her coat pocket, the paper worn soft from weeks of reading and rereading. "At Silver Ridge Ranch." The driver's hands tightened on the reins. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the February wind. "Silver Ridge," he finally said. "That's Elias Cade's place." "You know him?" "Everyone knows him. Good man. Quiet. Keeps to himself since his father passed." The driver paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "But miss, that advertisement you answered, the midnight shift, ain't no place for a lady. Them hours are dark and lonely, and a ranch that far out in the valley, well, it ain't proper." Clara felt the familiar spark of defiance that had carried her through the last terrible year ignite in her chest. "Proper is a luxury I can't afford, sir. I need this job." The stagecoach rattled into town, wheels crunching over half-frozen mud and scattered hay. Clara caught glimpses of life through the window, a woman hanging laundry despite the cold, two men arguing outside the general store, a child running after a dog, laughter spilling from somewhere she couldn't see. Normal life. The kind of life that had been stolen from her when the fever took her parents, when the bank took the house, when the world revealed itself to be far less kind than she'd been raised to believe. The coach jerked to a stop in front of a large building with a painted sign that read Rusty Spur Saloon. Even in the afternoon light, Clara could hear the muffled sounds of voices and piano music, could smell tobacco smoke and whiskey drifting through the walls. "The ranch owner said to meet him here at 4 o'clock, Clara said, checking the small watch pinned to her dress. Her mother's watch, one of the last things she hadn't been forced to sell. 3:45. She had 15 minutes. The driver climbed down and opened the coach door. Cold air rushed in, stealing Clara's breath. He offered his hand, his face weathered and concerned. "You sure about this, miss? I make the return trip day after tomorrow. Still time to change your mind. Head back east where a young woman might have better prospects." Clara took his hand and stepped down onto the muddy street. Her boots, resoled twice now and barely holding together, sank slightly into the half-frozen ground. She looked up at the driver and smiled, though it felt like lifting something heavy. "Thank you for your concern, but I didn't come all this way to turn back now." She paid him the last of her traveling money, 50 cents that left her with exactly $3.15 to her name, and took her battered carpetbag from the luggage rack. Everything she owned in the world fit in that one bag: 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's Bible, her father's fountain pen, and a photograph of her family taken 5 years ago when the world still made sense. The stagecoach pulled away, leaving Clara standing alone in the street. People passed by, cowboys with dust on their clothes, women with shopping baskets, a group of men who stopped their conversation to stare at her with undisguised curiosity. Clara felt their eyes like brands. She was an outsider here, a woman alone in a frontier town where women alone were either widows or worse. She lifted her chin and walked toward the rusty Spur saloon. The doors swung open before she could reach them, and a man stumbled out, already drunk though the sun hadn't set. He nearly collided with Clara, caught himself on the railing, and looked at her with bleary eyes. "Well, well," he slurred, "what's a little dove like you doing out here? You lost, sweetheart?" "Excuse me." Clara stepped around him, her heart hammering. "Hey now, don't be unfriendly." His hand caught her arm. "Let me buy you a drink, introduce you to some real men who—" The lady said, "Excuse me." The voice came from the doorway of the saloon, deep, quiet, and carrying the kind of authority that needed no volume to be heard. "I suggest you listen." The drunk man's hand dropped from Clara's arm immediately. "Didn't mean nothing by it, Cade. Just being friendly." "Be friendly somewhere else." The drunk man shuffled away, muttering under his breath. Clara looked up at the man who'd spoken, Elias Cade, it had to be, and felt something in her chest go still and strange. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean strength that came from work, not leisure. His face was weathered but not unkind, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' stubble, and eyes the color of a storm rolling across gray mountains, silver blue and watchful. He wore a dark shirt, leather vest, and a gun belt that sat on his hips like it belonged there. His hat shadowed his face, but even in the dim afternoon light, Clara could see the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, as if he'd learned long ago not to ask the world for anything he didn't earn. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "And you're Mr. Cade?" He nodded once, sharp and efficient. His eyes moved over her face, her worn coat, her carpet bag, taking in details with the swift assessment of a man who'd learned to read people for survival. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy something, because the tension in his jaw eased slightly. "You came," he said, and there was something in his voice Clara couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or surprise. "I wasn't sure you would." "Your advertisement promised good pay and honest work," Clara said. "That's all I need. It's hard work, midnight to dawn, 6 nights a week. The mares are foaling early this season, and they need watching through the night. It's cold, it's lonely, and it's not work most women would take." "Then it's fortunate I'm not most women." Clara met his eyes directly, letting him see that she meant it. "I need this job, Mr. Cade. I'll work harder than any man you could hire, and I won't complain. Just give me the chance to prove it." For a long moment, Elias Cade said nothing. He just looked at her with those storm-colored eyes, and Clara had the strangest sensation that he was seeing past her brave words to the desperation beneath, to the girl who'd lost everything and was holding herself together with pride and sheer stubborn will. Then he nodded. "Come inside. We'll talk terms over coffee, and then I'll take you to the ranch." He held the saloon door open for her. Clara took a breath, adjusted her grip on her carpet bag, and walked inside. The rusty Spur saloon was exactly what Clara expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. The interior was dim, lit by oil lamps and the gray afternoon light filtering through dusty windows. The air smelled of tobacco, whiskey, sawdust, and coffee. A long bar ran the length of one wall, polished wood scarred by years of glasses and elbows. Tables filled the space, most of them occupied by men playing cards, drinking, or simply sitting in weary silence. A piano sat in the corner, silent now, its keys yellowed like old teeth. Every single person in the room stopped what they were doing when Clara walked in. The silence was sudden and absolute. Cards hung suspended mid-deal, glasses paused halfway to lips, conversations died mid-sentence. Clara felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes settle on her like snow accumulating on weak branches. A woman in a saloon in the middle of the afternoon. A woman who clearly wasn't a working girl, wasn't dressed in silk or paint, wasn't smiling the practiced smile of someone selling something. Just a woman, alone, with a carpet bag and desperation in the lines of her face. "Back to your business, boys," Elias said quietly, and somehow that quiet voice carried to every corner of the room. "The ladies with me." The saloon slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed in lower tones. Cards were dealt again. But Clara could still feel the glances, the curiosity, the judgment. She followed Elias to a table in the back corner, the darkest, most private spot in the room, and sat down with her back to the wall, her carpet bag clutched in her lap like armor. Elias settled into the chair across from her, his movements economical and deliberate. He caught the eye of the bartender, a heavy-set man with impressive mustaches, and held up 2 fingers. The bartender nodded and began preparing coffee. "You'll have to forgive the attention," Elias said. "Willow Bend doesn't see many newcomers, especially not young women traveling alone. They'll gossip for a day or 2, then move on to something else." "I'm used to being talked about," Clara said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Back east, after my parents died, after I lost the house, people had plenty to say about Clara Whitmore, the girl who thought she was too proud to accept charity, too stubborn to marry the first man who offered." "Did someone offer?" 3 someones. One was 60 years old and looking for a nurse more than a wife. One was my age, but drank more than he earned. The third— Clara paused, remembering Thomas Fletcher's sweaty hands and presumptuous smile. "The third thought that because I was desperate, I should be grateful for any attention, regardless of how I was treated." "I see." Elias's jaw tightened slightly. "And so you came west." "I came west because I'd rather take my chances with honest work in a hard place than sell myself to a man who saw me as property." Clara met his eyes. "I'm not looking for a husband, Mr. Cade. I'm looking for a job and the independence that comes with earning my own way." The bartender arrived with 2 cups of coffee, black and steaming. He set them down carefully, his eyes flicking between Clara and Elias with open curiosity before retreating. Elias wrapped his hands around his cup, but didn't drink. "The advertisement was honest about the work," he said. "Silver Ridge Ranch is 8 miles from town, up in the valley where the mountain meadows start. We run cattle and breed horses, quarter horses mostly, with some draft stock. This time of year the mares are foaling, and it happens mostly at night. They need watching. Someone to be there if there's trouble, if a foal comes wrong, if a mare needs help." "I know horses," Clara said. "My father bred them before we lost everything. I've helped with foalings before. I'm not squeamish, and I'm not afraid of work." "The hours are midnight to dawn," Elias continued. 6 nights a week, you'll have Sundays off. Pay is $30 a month, plus room and board. There's a cabin on the property you'll have to yourself. It's small, but it's warm and clean. Meals with the ranch hands if you want them, or I can arrange for supplies so you can cook for yourself." $30 a month. Clara did the calculation quickly. More money than she'd ever made in her life. More than most women could earn unless they were teachers or seamstresses with years of experience. It was generous. Almost too generous. "Why so much?" she asked bluntly. "You could hire a ranch hand for less." "I could," Elias agreed, "but I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't show up drunk, won't fall asleep on watch, won't rough up the horses if they get frustrated. I need someone with a gentle hand and a steady nerve." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable that he quickly shuddered away. "And I need someone who understands that these animals aren't just livestock. They matter." The way he said it, "they matter," made Clara's chest ache with recognition. She understood in that moment that Elias Cade was a man who'd learned to pour his capacity for care into things that couldn't leave him, couldn't die unexpectedly, couldn't be taken away by banks or fever or the casual cruelty of the world. "They matter to me too," Clara said quietly. "When do I start?" "Tonight, if you're willing. I'll take you to the ranch now, get you settled in the cabin, show you around the stables. The first mare is due any day now. Could be tonight, could be next week. Nature keeps her own schedule." "I'm willing." Clara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Cade. You won't regret hiring me." "Call me Elias," he said. "We don't stand on ceremony much out here." He finally took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "And I don't think I'll regret it. I've got a sense about people, Miss Whitmore. Have to, in this line of work. And my sense says you're exactly the kind of person I've been looking for." There was something in the way he said it, exactly the kind of person I've been looking for, that made Clara's breath catch. She told herself it was just about the job, just about her skills with horses. But the way Elias looked at her, the strange intensity in those storm-gray eyes, suggested something deeper that Clara didn't dare examine too closely. "Call me Clara," she said. "If we're going to be working together, we might as well use first names." Elias nodded. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, there and gone so quickly, Clara almost missed it. "Clara," he said, and her name in his rough, quiet voice sounded like something precious being handled with care. They finished their coffee in companionable silence. Around them, the saloon continued its afternoon rhythm, voices rising and falling, glasses clinking, the occasional burst of laughter. Clara felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease for the first time in weeks. She had a job. She had a place to go. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had when she stepped off the stagecoach. "Ready?" Elias finally asked. Clara stood, picking up her carpet bag. "Ready." They walked out of the saloon together, into the cold February afternoon. Elias's horse, a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes, was tied to the hitching post. Next to it was a wagon with a sturdy draft horse in the traces. "We'll take the wagon," Elias said. "It's too far to walk, and your bag would be awkward on horseback." He took her carpet bag, ignoring her protest, and lifted it into the wagon bed with easy strength. Then he offered his hand to help her onto the seat. Clara hesitated for just a moment. She'd been alone for so long, had been so careful to maintain her independence, that accepting help felt like weakness. But Elias's hand was steady and his eyes were kind, and she was so tired of carrying everything by herself. She took his hand. His palm was calloused and warm even through her thin gloves. He helped her onto the wagon seat, his touch brief and respectful, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Hold on," he said. "The road gets rough once we leave town." The wagon lurched forward. Clara gripped the edge of the seat as they rolled down Willow Bend's main street, past the general store and the church and the small schoolhouse with its bell tower. People watched them go, curious, speculating, already weaving stories about the strange woman who'd arrived alone and left with Elias Cade. Let them talk, Clara thought. She'd survived worse than gossip. The town fell away behind them, and the valley opened up ahead, vast and beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. Mountains rose on either side, their peaks still white with winter snow. The road wound through scattered pines and bare aspens, following the curve of a half-frozen creek. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of the draft horse's hooves, and the wind singing through the trees. "It's beautiful," Clara said, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "It is," Elias agreed. "Harsh, but beautiful. It can be lonely out here, especially in winter when the snow comes and the valley gets cut off from town for weeks at a time. Some people can't take it, the isolation, the silence. They come out here thinking they want freedom and space, but what they really want is escape. And escape isn't the same thing." Clara considered that. What's the difference? Escape is running from something. Freedom is running toward something. Elias kept his eyes on the road, his hand steady on the reins. People who come here to escape eventually realize they brought their problems with them. But people who come here for freedom, they find what they're looking for if they're willing to work for it. "Which one are you?" Clara asked. Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Both, I suppose. I came back here after my father died because I was running from the war, from what I'd seen and done. But I stayed because I found something worth working for. The land, the horses, a life that makes sense." He glanced at her. "What about you? Escape or freedom?" Clara thought about the question, really thought about it. "I wanted escape at first," she admitted. "After my parents died, after everything fell apart, I just wanted to run as far as I could from the pain and the memories. But somewhere on that long train ride west, it changed. I started thinking about who I could become instead of what I'd lost. So maybe I'm looking for freedom now." "Then you came to the right place," Elias said softly. They rode in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who understood that not everything needed to be filled with words. Clara watched the landscape roll past, the stark beauty of late winter, the promise of spring hidden beneath the frozen ground. She thought about the year behind her, the grief and loss and desperate struggle, and felt something in her chest begin to ease. Not hope? Not yet. But perhaps the possibility of hope, which was something. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains when Silver Ridge Ranch finally came into view. Clara's breath caught at the sight of it. The ranch spread across a wide valley meadow, sheltered by pines on three sides, and open to the south, where the mountain creek ran clear and cold. The main house was large and solidly built from logs and stone, with a wraparound porch and smoke rising from two chimneys. Nearby stood a massive barn, painted red and weathered by years of mountain weather. Beyond that were corrals, outbuildings, a chicken coop, and Clara's heart lifted, a long, low stable with Dutch doors already cracked open to the evening air. "Welcome to Silver Ridge," Elias said, and Clara heard the pride in his voice, the love for this place that he couldn't quite hide. "It's wonderful," Clara breathed. "It's home." Elias guided the wagon past the main house toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings, nestled at the edge of the pine trees where the forest met the meadow. "That's your place there. Like I said, it's small, but it should have everything you need." The cabin was simple but charming. Log walls chinked against the cold, a stone chimney, two windows with real glass, and a solid door painted blue. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop, climbed down, and offered his hand to help Clara descend. This time she took it without hesitation. "Let me show you inside," Elias said, retrieving her carpet bag from the wagon bed. He led her to the door, produced a key from his pocket, and unlocked it. The door swung open and Clara stepped inside. The cabin was perfect. One room, but spacious and clearly well maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already laid with kindling and logs, ready to be lit. A narrow bed stood against the opposite wall, made up with clean quilts in shades of blue and cream. There was a small table with two chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves stocked with dishes and basic supplies, and, Clara almost laughed with relief, a proper stove in the corner, not just a fireplace for cooking. "It's not fancy," Elias said, setting her bag down near the bed. "But the roof doesn't leak, the fireplace draws well, and I had the chinking redone last fall so it stays warm. There's a pump just outside for water, and the privy is about 30 yards back in the trees. I keep it clean and stocked with lime. Firewood is in the shed attached to the back. If you need anything else, just let me know." "It's perfect," Claire said honestly. "More than perfect. I didn't expect—" She trailed off, suddenly emotional. She'd expected a bunkhouse, maybe, or a rough shed, not this cozy, carefully prepared space that felt like someone had been waiting for her. "I wanted it to be right," Elias said quietly, "for whoever took the job. A person deserves a good place to rest, especially if they're working hard hours." He moved to the fireplace and knelt to light the kindling. Within moments, flames were crackling to life, casting warm light across the cabin walls. "Fire should warm the place up in about 15 minutes. I'll let you settle in, and then I'll come back in an hour to show you the stables and introduce you to the horses." "Thank you," Clara said. "Elias, thank you for all of this." He stood, brushing soot from his hands. For a moment, he just looked at her, and Clara saw something in his face that made her heart beat faster, something tender and careful and almost afraid. "No need for thanks," he said finally. "You came a long way for this job. Least I could do is make sure you're comfortable." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Clara, I'm glad you're here. I think you're going to fit in just fine." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Clara alone in her new home with a fire warming the walls and questions burning in her mind. She stood for a moment, just breathing, just letting herself believe that this was real. Then she moved to the bed, set her carpet bag down, and began to unpack her small collection of belongings. Her dresses went on hooks on the wall. Her mother's Bible went on the table beside the bed. Her father's fountain pen and the family photograph went on the shelf above the fireplace, where she could see them and remember, but not be overwhelmed by memory. When everything was put away, Clara sat in the rocking chair near the fire and closed her eyes. The warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the cold that had lived in her body for months. She let herself rest, just for a moment, let herself acknowledge how far she'd come and how much farther she had to go. Outside, she could hear the ranch coming to life for evening, voices calling to each other, horses neighing, the distant lowing of cattle. The sounds of a working place, a living place, a place where she might, just might, find the freedom she'd been searching for. When Elias knocked on her door exactly 1 hour later, Clara was ready. She'd washed her face in cold water from the pump, had pinned her hair back neatly, had put on her sturdier dress and her warmest shawl. She opened the door to find him standing there in the purple twilight, his hat in his hands. "Ready to meet the ladies?" he asked, a hint of humor in his voice. "The ladies?" "The mares. They run this ranch, whether the horses and men know it or not." He offered her his arm, and after only a brief hesitation, Clara took it. They walked together across the ranch yard toward the stables as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Clara felt the solid strength of Elias's arm beneath her hand, felt the careful way he matched his stride to hers, felt the beginning of something she couldn't name taking root in her chest. She'd come west looking for a job. But as the stable doors swung open and the warm smell of hay and horses enveloped her, as Elias led her inside to meet the pregnant mares who would be her charges, Clara wondered if perhaps she'd found something more. The night was just beginning, and so, though Clara didn't know it yet, was everything else. The stable was warmer than Clara expected, heated by the bodies of a dozen horses and insulated by thick walls and generous amounts of straw. Oil lamps hung from the rafters, casting golden light across the wide central aisle that ran between the stalls. The smell was rich and familiar. Hay, leather, grain, and the clean animal warmth of well-tended horses. Clara breathed it in and felt something in her chest unknot. This, at least, was the language she spoke. "We've got 14 mares total," Elias said, leading her down the aisle. 8 of them are pregnant, all due within the next 6 weeks. The others are maiden mares will breed this spring. He stopped at the first stall, where a dark bay mare with a white blaze looked up from her hay, with calm, intelligent eyes. "This is Sage. She's the oldest, 11 years now, and this will be her 6th foal. She's steady, reliable, never gives us trouble." Clara approached the stall door slowly, extending her hand for Sage to sniff. The mare's nose was velvet soft against her palm, her breath warm and sweet with hay. "Hello, beautiful girl," Clara murmured. "You're going to be a mama soon, aren't you?" Sage whuffed softly, as if in agreement, and lowered her head so Clara could stroke her forehead. Clara felt Elias watching her, felt his attention like heat against her skin. "She likes you," he said. Sage doesn't warm up to strangers easily. Usually takes her a few days to decide if someone's worth her time. "Animals can tell when someone respects them," Clara said, running her hand down Sage's neck. "My father taught me that. He said if you approach a horse with fear or arrogance, they'll know it. But if you approach with respect and calm, they'll meet you halfway. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Clara's throat tightened. "He loved horses more than anything except my mother and me. When we lost him to the fever, the horses went next. We couldn't afford to keep them. Couldn't afford to keep anything." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. She usually kept her grief locked away, but something about the quiet stable and Elias's steady presence made the truth easier to speak. Elias was silent for a moment. "I lost my father 5 years ago," he said finally. "Heart attack. He was shoeing a horse one morning, stood up, put his hand to his chest, and that was it. Gone before he hit the ground." His voice was carefully neutral, but Clara heard the pain beneath it. "He built this ranch from nothing. Came out here with my mother in '68 when this valley was still wild and dangerous, fought off mountain lions, survived winters that killed their neighbors, turned raw land into something beautiful, and then one day his heart just stopped." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "So am I." Elias moved to the next stall. "This is Willow. She's younger, only 4, and this is her first foal. She's a little nervous, so she'll need extra watching." They moved from stall to stall, and Elias introduced Clara to each mare with a care that revealed how well he knew them. There was Cricket, a dappled gray with a sweet temperament. Morning Star, a palomino who liked to steal tools from the ranch hand's pockets. Rosie, a compact sorrel with a stubborn streak. Luna, an elegant black mare who'd been his mother's favorite. Each horse had a personality, a history, a place in the careful world Elias had built. By the time they reached the last stall, Clara's heart was full, and her mind was racing with information. Which mares were close to foaling, which ones needed special attention, What signs to watch for that might indicate trouble? The last one is Starlight, Elias said, and something in his voice changed, became softer, more vulnerable. She's special. Clara looked into the stall and understood immediately why. Starlight was the most beautiful horse Clara had ever seen, a pale gray that was almost white, with a flowing mane and tail like silver silk, and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the mountains. She was heavily pregnant, her belly round and low, and she moved with the careful dignity of a queen approaching her coronation. She was my mother's last foal, Elias said quietly. Born the spring before my mother died. Ma hand-raised her, spent hours every day talking to her, gentling her, said Starlight was going to be something extraordinary. He paused, his hand resting on the stall door. Ma made me promise I'd keep her no matter what. Said that as long as Starlight was on this ranch, part of her would be here too. Clara heard the grief in his voice, the love and the loss tangled together. When did your mother pass? 3 years ago, cancer. We knew it was coming, had time to say goodbye, but that didn't make it easier. Elias's jaw tightened. She died in the spring, when the meadow was full of wildflowers. Made me carry her out to the porch so she could see them one last time. She looked at the mountains, looked at me, and said, "Promise me you'll find someone to share this with. Someone strong and kind and not afraid of hard work. Promise me you won't spend your life alone just because you're afraid of losing again." "And did you promise?" Clara asked softly. "I did, but I didn't know how to keep that promise." He finally looked at her, his storm-gray eyes dark with emotion. "Until maybe now." The air between them suddenly felt charged, alive with something unspoken. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the weight she heard in his words. But before she could speak, a sound echoed through the stable, a low, distressed whicker from one of the stalls. Elias's head snapped up immediately. "That's Willow," he said, already moving. "Something's wrong." Clara followed him down the aisle to the nervous young mare's stall. Willow was pacing, her ears flat back, her tail swishing with agitation. As Clara watched, the mare stopped, stretched her neck out, and curled her lip, a clear sign of discomfort. "Is she in labor?" Clara asked. "Early stages, looks like." Elias opened the stall door carefully. "But she's 2 weeks early, and first-time mothers sometimes have trouble. I need to examine her, see how she's progressing." For the next hour, Clara watched as Elias worked with quiet competence, his hands gentle despite their size, his voice low and calming as he examined the restless mare. He explained everything he was doing, teaching Clara the signs to watch for, the stages of labor, the timeline, what was normal, and what required intervention. Willow's labor was progressing, but slowly, too slowly. "She's anxious," Elias said, backing out of the stall. "First-time mothers sometimes stall out if they don't feel safe. We'll need to watch her close tonight. If she hasn't progressed in the next few hours, I may need to help her along." "I can stay," Clara offered immediately. "Watch her. It's what you hired me for, isn't it?" Elias hesitated. "Your first night, though. You should rest, get settled in properly before—" "I'm already settled," Clara interrupted, "and I'm not afraid of jumping straight into work. Show me what to watch for, and I'll call you if something changes." For a moment she thought he might argue, but then he nodded, something like relief crossing his face. "All right, but I'll stay too, at least for a few hours. Make sure you know what you're doing before I leave you alone." They settled into the rhythm of waiting, that particular kind of vigilance that horse people knew well, where every shift in sound might mean something or nothing at all. Elias brought a pot of coffee from the ranch house and 2 tin cups. They sat on hay bales outside Willow's stall, watching the young mare pace and pause, her body working through ancient instincts. "Tell me about your life back east," Elias said after a while. "Before everything changed." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, grateful for its warmth. "It seems like a different life now. Like it happened to someone else." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. My father bred horses for wealthy clients, driving horses mostly, elegant matched pairs for carriages. My mother kept house and gave piano lessons. We had a small farm outside Baltimore, enough land for the horses and a garden, It was good. Sounds peaceful. It was. Until the fever came. Clara's voice went flat. Summer of 73. It swept through our county like wildfire. My mother got sick first, then my father. I nursed them both for 3 weeks, barely sleeping, barely eating, but it wasn't enough. They died within 2 days of each other. She stopped, swallowed hard. I survived. I don't know why. Sometimes I wished I hadn't. Elias said nothing, just listened with that quality of attention that made Clara feel truly heard. After they died, everything fell apart, she continued. There were debts I didn't know about. My father had borrowed against the farm to buy breeding stock, thinking he'd pay it back with the profits. But without him, there were no profits. The bank took the land, took the horses, took everything. I had 3 weeks to get out. No other family? None. My parents were both only children, and their parents were long dead. I had some friends, neighbors who felt sorry for me, but pity only goes so far. I tried to find work, governess, seamstress, anything, but single women without connections don't get far in Baltimore society. And then the men started circling. The ones who proposed, Elias said. The ones who thought a desperate woman would say yes to anything. Clara's hands tightened on her cup. The worst part was how reasonable everyone acted, like I was being foolish for not accepting. Beggars can't be choosers, Clara. Marriage would solve all your problems. You should be grateful for any offer, as if selling myself was the only sensible option. But you refused. I refused. Clara met his eyes. I'd rather starve with my dignity than eat well on my knees. So I sold everything I could, my mother's jewelry, my father's pocket watch, anything of value, bought a train ticket west, and answered your advertisement. And here I am. Here you are, Elias echoed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I admire that. The courage it takes to choose the hard path because it's honest rather than the easy path that costs your soul. Most people don't have that kind of strength. Most people haven't lost everything. You learn what you're made of when you've got nothing left to lose. Is that what you think? Elias's voice was gentle. That you've got nothing left to lose? Clara considered the question. No, she said slowly. I suppose I do have something to lose now. This job, this chance, my self-respect. She smiled slightly. Turns out even when you think you've hit bottom, there's still farther to fall, but there's also still room to climb. Then we'll make sure you keep climbing, Elias said, and the certainty in his voice made something warm bloom in Clara's chest. Willow nickered softly from her stall. Both Clara and Elias turned immediately. The mare had stopped pacing and was lowering herself carefully to the straw, her sides heaving. She's lying down, Clara said. Is that good? Could be. Means she's getting serious about this. Elias set down his coffee and moved to the stall door. When she starts pushing, we'll know we're getting close. They watched in tense silence as Willow labored. The mare would push, rest, push again, her body working with the instinct of 1,000,000 generations. Clara found herself barely breathing, her hands clenched together, praying silently that both mother and foal would be all right. An hour passed. Then another. Willow was tiring. Clara could see it. Her pushes were weaker, her rest periods longer. The foal should have appeared by now, but there was still no sign of the water breaking, no glimpse of tiny hooves. Something's wrong, Elias said grimly. The foal's not positioned right. I need to help her. What can I do? Get more lamps, we'll need better light, and fetch the medical kit from the tack room, the brown leather bag on the 3rd shelf. Quickly now. Clara ran. She gathered lamps from other parts of the stable, lighting them with shaking hands, arranging them around Willow's stall until it was bright as day. She found the medical kit exactly where Elias said it would be, organized, clean, ready for emergencies. When she returned, Elias had removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves, his face set with determination. Hold the lamp here, he directed. Keep it steady. I need to reach in, feel what's happening, maybe reposition the foal if I can. Clara held the lamp with both hands, forcing them not to shake. She watched as Elias worked, his face tight with concentration, his hands disappearing as he examined the struggling mare. Willow groaned, a deep animal sound of pain and exhaustion, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Come on, girl," Elias murmured. "Come on, sweet thing. Let me help you. We're going to get your baby out safe, I promise." Time seemed to stretch and compress. Minutes felt like hours. Elias's forehead was beaded with sweat despite the cool air. Clara's arms burned from holding the lamp steady, but she didn't dare lower it. "There," Elias said suddenly. Yes, the foal's front legs were bent back. I've straightened them. Now we just need... Willow, push, Mama, push!" The mare pushed. Clara saw the water break, saw the first glimpse of pale hooves, and her heart soared. "That's it," Elias encouraged. "That's it, girl. One more big push." Willow pushed again with everything she had left. The foal's nose appeared, then its head, and suddenly Elias was guiding the shoulders out, supporting the wet, slippery body as the foal slid into the world in a rush of fluid and membrane. For one terrible moment, the foal didn't move. It lay still in the straw, too still, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Then Elias cleared the membrane from its nose and mouth, rubbed its chest vigorously with a handful of straw, and the foal gasped, once, twice, and drew its first shuddering breath. "There you go," Elias said softly. "There you go, little one. Welcome to the world." Willow lifted her head, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she nickered to her baby. She struggled to her feet, instinct driving her despite her weariness, and began licking the foal, cleaning it, claiming it as her own. Clara set down the lamp with trembling hands and covered her mouth, trying not to sob with relief. She'd helped with foalings before, but never one so difficult, never one where she'd truly feared they might lose both mare and foal. "It's a filly," Elias said, standing and wiping his hands on a towel. His face was transformed by a smile of pure joy. A beautiful little filly. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, watching as the foal, already trying to stand on impossibly long, wobbly legs, nuzzled against her mother. "They're both perfect." "Thanks to you." Elias turned to her. "You kept calm, followed directions, didn't panic. A lot of people freeze in situations like that. But you stayed steady." "I just held a lamp," Clara protested. "You did more than that. You were here, you helped, and you didn't give up on them." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "That's what I need, Clara. Someone who doesn't give up. Someone I can count on." The weight of his words settled over Clara like a blanket. She realized that this wasn't just about the horses, wasn't just about a job. Elias was trusting her with something precious. His animals, his ranch, the legacy his parents had built. And more than that, he was trusting her not to leave, not to disappoint him, not to be another loss in a life that had already held too many. "I won't let you down," she said quietly. "I promise." "I believe you." They stayed in the stable until dawn, watching as Willow bonded with her filly, making sure both were healthy and stable. The foal was nursing well, her tiny tail swishing with contentment. Willow was exhausted but peaceful, the trauma of the difficult birth already fading as maternal instinct took over. By the time the first gray light of morning crept through the stable windows, Clara was swaying with weariness. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, the long stagecoach ride, the arrival in town, settling into the cabin, and then the all-night vigil with Willow. Her eyes felt full of sand, and her body ached from tension and cold. "You need rest," Elias said, noticing her exhaustion. "Go back to your cabin, sleep for a few hours. I'll watch the stable." "But I'm supposed to work nights," Clara protested weakly. "And you will, starting tonight. But you've more than earned some rest after helping deliver a foal on your first day." He smiled, and Clara realized it was the first real smile she'd seen from him, not just a ghost of amusement, but genuine warmth that lit up his face and made him look younger, less burdened. "Go on, I'll wake you in time for supper." Clara was too tired to argue. She walked back to her cabin through the dawn light, her legs heavy as stones. The ranch was stirring to life around her, ranch hands emerging from the bunkhouse, smoke rising from the main house chimney, roosters crowing their territorial claims. She heard voices calling good morning, felt curious eyes on her back, but she was too weary to care. Inside her cabin, the fire had burned down to embers, but the room was still warm. Clara barely managed to remove her boots before collapsing onto the bed, not even bothering to change out of her dress or let down her hair. She pulled the quilt over herself and closed her eyes. Sleep took her instantly, pulling her down into darkness where she dreamed of horses being born under starlight, and a man with storm-gray eyes who looked at her like she mattered. When Clara woke, the light through the windows was golden amber, late afternoon. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, her body stiff from sleeping in her clothes. Then memory returned in a rush. The train, the town, the ranch, Willow and her filly, Elias's quiet strength and careful kindness. She sat up slowly, pushing hair from her face. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she'd barely eaten yesterday. She changed into her other dress, a simple dark blue wool, patched but clean, and did her best to make herself presentable. Her hair was a disaster, full of straw and tangles, but she managed to brush it out and pin it back into a respectable bun. A knock at the door made her jump. "Clara, you awake?" Elias's voice was muffled through the wood. She opened the door to find him standing there with a covered basket. He'd cleaned up since she'd last seen him. Fresh shirt, shaved face, hair damp from washing. He looked tired, but satisfied. "Brought you some supper," he said, offering the basket. "Figured you might be hungry. My brother Luke made it. He does most of the cooking for the ranch hands." "You have a brother?" Clara took the basket, surprised by its weight. "Half-brother, technically. My father's son from his first marriage. Luke's mother died when he was young, and then Pa married my mother. Luke's older than me by 8 years, but we're close." Elias leaned against the doorframe. "He's been running the ranch with me since Pa died. You'll meet him properly at supper tomorrow. He's been in town dealing with suppliers all day." Clara lifted the cloth covering the basket and found fried chicken, biscuits, beans, and a thick slice of apple pie. Her mouth watered. "This is too much. Luke always cooks too much. Says he'd rather have leftovers than let someone go hungry." Elias paused. "How'd you sleep?" "Like the dead." Clara realized how that sounded and winced. I know what you mean." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "That's good. You needed it. Willow and the filly are doing well, by the way. Both strong and healthy. I've been checking on them every few hours." "Have you slept at all?" "A little. Few hours after you left and another hour this afternoon. I'm used to broken sleep during foaling season." Clara studied his face, the shadows under his eyes, the weariness in the set of his shoulders. "How long has it been since you slept a full night?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Honestly, since my father died. 5 years." "5 years?" Clara was shocked. "But Elias, that's not healthy. You can't—" "I manage," he cut her off gently. "I've learned to get by on short stretches, but that's part of why I hired you. The nights are the hardest. When it's dark and quiet, and there's nothing to do but think, that's when the ghosts come calling. If someone else is watching the horses, maybe I can finally rest." The vulnerability in his admission made Clara's chest ache. She understood now why he'd been so particular about finding the right person, why he'd been willing to pay so well. It wasn't just about the horses. It was about survival, his own. "Then I'll watch well," she said firmly. "Starting tonight, you go to bed at a decent hour and actually sleep, and I'll make sure nothing goes wrong in the stable." "You're sure? Second night in a row is going to be hard, especially with broken sleep today." "I'm sure." Clara met his eyes. "Let me do the job you hired me for, Elias. Let me help." Something shifted in his expression, gratitude and relief, and something deeper that Clara didn't have a name for. "All right," he said softly. "I'll show you the full routine after you eat, answer any questions you have, and then I'll try to sleep." "Good." Clara glanced at the basket of food. "Have you eaten?" "Not yet." "Then sit down and share this with me. There's way too much for one person, and your brother will be insulted if I don't finish it." Elias hesitated, then smiled. That real smile again that transformed his face. "Luke will be insufferable if he thinks his cooking impressed you. But all right, if you're offering." They sat at the small table in Clara's cabin, sharing the meal between them, and for the first time since she'd lost her parents, Clara didn't eat alone. They talked as they ate. Easy conversation about the ranch, the horses, the valley's harsh winters and spectacular springs. Elias told her about growing up here, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the grizzly bear his father killed when Elias was 6 years old. "The bear came down from the mountains during a drought," Elias said, breaking apart a biscuit. "Desperate for food, bold with hunger. It killed one of our cows and was going after another when Pa heard the commotion. He grabbed his rifle and went out there in the dark, just him and a lamp, killed the bear with one shot between the eyes. He sounds fearless, Clara said. He was. Or maybe he was just too stubborn to be afraid. He used to say that the land rewards courage and punishes hesitation, that if you're going to live in wild country, you have to be willing to fight for what's yours. Elias smiled slightly. My mother said he was part mountain lion himself, the way he'd charge at danger. She was the calm one, the steady one. Between them, they were unstoppable. You miss them. Every day. He looked at her. Do you? Miss your parents? Every day, Clara echoed. Sometimes I'll forget for a few minutes, get caught up in something, and then it hits me all over again that they're gone, that I can't ask my mother's advice or hear my father's laugh. The grief gets quieter over time, but it never really leaves. No, Elias agreed quietly. It doesn't. You just learn to carry it. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and Clara realized that this, sharing food and grief and quiet understanding with someone who didn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed, was a kind of healing she hadn't known she needed. After they ate, Elias walked Clara through the full evening routine. He showed her how to check each mare, what to note in the logbook he kept in the tack room, what signs indicated imminent labor versus early labor versus false labor. He explained the emergency protocols, where to find him if something went wrong, how to handle complications she could manage alone, and which ones required immediate help. Trust your instincts, he said as they stood in the stable aisle with the last light of day fading through the windows. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't hesitate to wake me. I'd rather be woken unnecessarily 10 times than sleep through one crisis. I understand, Clara said. I'll be careful. I promise. Elias nodded. He seemed reluctant to leave, kept finding one more thing to show her, one more instruction to give. Finally, he ran out of reasons to stay. I guess I should go, he said. Let you get to work. I'll be in the main house if you need me. My room is the one in the back corner facing the stable. Just knock loud and I'll hear you. I'll be fine, Clara assured him. Go rest, Elias. You've earned it. He studied her face for a long moment, those storm-gray eyes searching for something. Then he nodded, touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was oddly formal and sweet, and walked out into the twilight. Clara watched him go. Watched until he disappeared into the main house and a lamp flickered to life in a back window. Then she turned to face the stable, the mares, the long night ahead, and she smiled. This was her place now. This was her purpose. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The night deepened around the ranch, and Clara began her watch. The first week passed in a rhythm that Clara's body learned before her mind fully grasped it. She slept in fragments during the day, woke to late afternoon light streaming through her cabin windows, ate whatever Luke left in a basket on her doorstep, and walked to the stable as the sun painted the western mountains gold and crimson. The nights were long and cold, and punctuated by the sounds of horses shifting in their stalls, wind rattling the stable doors, and her own footsteps on the wooden floor as she made her rounds every hour. 3 more mares foaled during that first week. Cricket delivered twin fillies on the 3rd night, a rare and dangerous occurrence that had Clara running for Elias at 2 a.m. He'd arrived within minutes, hair disheveled and shirt buttoned wrong, and together they'd guided both foals safely into the world. Morning Star foaled easily on the 5th night, producing a sturdy colt with his mother's palomino coloring, and Rosie, the stubborn sorrel, had labored for 6 hours before finally delivering a filly so small and perfect that Clara had cried when the foal took her first wobbly steps. Each morning, just before dawn, Elias would appear in the stable to relieve her. He never looked fully rested despite Clara's presence allowing him to sleep, but the shadows under his eyes had lightened somewhat, and occasionally she'd catch him humming as he worked, a sure sign that the burden he carried was easing, even if only slightly. They would talk during those dawn transitions, sharing coffee from the pot Clara kept warm on the small stove in the tack room. Elias would ask about the night's events, would examine each mare and foal with careful attention, would enter notes in his meticulous logbook, and Clara would ask questions about the ranch's history, about the horse's bloodlines, about his plans for the upcoming breeding season, and Elias would answer with a patience that suggested he was grateful for her genuine interest. On the 8th morning, as pink light flooded the valley and Clara was preparing to return to her cabin, Elias said, "You're settling in well, better than I hoped." Clara looked up from where she was closing the logbook. "You had doubts?" "Not doubts exactly, just uncertainty. Taking a chance on someone you've never met, trusting them with something this important. It's a risk, but you've proven yourself 10 times over already." "I told you I wouldn't let you down." Clara handed him the logbook, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The casual touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she pulled her hand back quickly, suddenly flustered. If Elias noticed, he didn't show it. "Luke wants to meet you properly," he said. "He's been complaining all week that you eat his food, but he never sees you. Would you join us for supper tonight before your shift? Nothing fancy, just the three of us at the main house." Clara hesitated. She'd caught glimpses of Luke during her comings and goings, a tall man with lighter hair than Elias and an easy smile, but they'd never spoken beyond brief nods of acknowledgement. The invitation felt significant somehow, like she was being asked to step across an invisible boundary from employee to something more integrated into the ranch's daily life. "I'd like that," she said finally. "What time?" 6 o'clock. I'll come fetch you." That afternoon, Clara woke early and took extra care with her appearance. She washed her hair in cold water from the pump, working out the tangles with her mother's ivory comb. She put on her better dress, dark green wool with cream-colored lace at the collar, one of the few nice things she'd managed to keep from her old life. She pinned her hair up carefully, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face, and even pinched her cheeks to bring color to her pale skin. When Elias knocked at 6, Clara opened the door feeling uncharacteristically nervous. His reaction was worth the effort. He stood frozen for a moment, his hat in his hands, and something flickered across his face that made Clara's breath catch. "You look," he started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "That's a beautiful dress." "Thank you," Clara said, feeling her cheeks warm. "I wanted to make a good impression on your brother." "You will," Elias said, and the way he looked at her suggested he wasn't thinking about his brother at all. They walked across the ranch yard together in the evening light. The main house looked warm and inviting, with smoke curling from both chimneys and the glow of lamps visible through the windows. Clara could smell something delicious cooking, roasted meat and fresh bread, and something sweet that made her stomach growl despite her nerves. Elias opened the door for her, and Clara stepped into a home that took her breath away. The interior was rustic but beautifully maintained, with log walls polished to a golden gleam and wide plank floors covered with thick woven rugs. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, big enough to roast a whole pig, with a crackling fire that filled the room with warmth and dancing light. The furniture was solid and handmade, a large wooden table that could seat a dozen people, chairs with carved backs, a comfortable-looking sofa covered in worn leather, shelves lined with books. Photographs and paintings hung on the walls, most of them depicting the ranch and the valley in different seasons. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed. "Ma's doing, mostly," Elias said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "She had a talent for making a place feel like home. Luke and I try to keep it the way she had it." "Well, you're doing a terrible job if you keep letting Elias track mud across my clean floors." The voice came from the kitchen area, warm with humor. A moment later, Luke appeared, wiping his hands on a towel. "You must be Clara. I'm Luke Cade, the better-looking and more charming of the Cade brothers." Clara couldn't help but smile. Luke was indeed handsome, taller than Elias by an inch or two, with sandy blonde hair, warm brown eyes, and an open, friendly face that invited trust. Where Elias was quiet intensity and guarded emotion, Luke radiated easy confidence and genuine warmth. "It's a pleasure to meet you properly," Clara said, offering her hand. Luke took it, but instead of shaking it, he bowed over it with exaggerated gallantry. "The pleasure is entirely mine. Any woman brave enough to work midnight shifts in a freezing stable and eat my cooking without complaint is worthy of the highest respect." "Your cooking is wonderful," Clara said honestly. "Best meals I've had in months." "See?" Luke shot a triumphant look at Elias. "She appreciates me. unlike certain grumpy younger brothers who act like eating is a chore. I appreciate you, Elias protested. I just don't feel the need to shower you with constant praise for doing something you already know you're good at. That's because you have the emotional range of a fence post. Luke turned back to Clara, grinning. Don't let his brooding fool you. Deep down, very deep down, beneath layers of stoic silence and cowboy posturing, he's actually capable of human feelings. Clara laughed, charmed despite herself. I'll keep that in mind. Good. Now come sit down. Dinner's almost ready, and I want to hear everything about how you've managed to survive a week of Elias's company without running screaming back to civilization. The meal was magnificent. Luke had prepared roasted venison with herbs, potatoes cooked in butter and cream, fresh bread that was still warm from the oven, and green beans preserved from last summer's garden. For dessert, there was apple pie with a flaky crust that melted on the tongue. Clara ate more than she had in weeks, savoring every bite, feeling strength seep back into her body with each mouthful. The conversation flowed easily, mostly guided by Luke's endless questions and storytelling. He wanted to know everything about Clara, where she came from, what her life had been like back east, how she'd learned about horses, what she thought of Montana Territory so far. Clara found herself answering honestly, her usual guardedness lowered by Luke's genuine interest and the comfortable warmth of the house. Elias was quieter, but Clara caught him watching her throughout the meal with an expression she couldn't quite read. Once, when Luke was in the kitchen fetching more coffee, Elias leaned across the table and said softly, "He likes you. Luke's usually more reserved with strangers." "I like him too," Clara said. "He's easy to talk to." Something flickered in Elias's eyes, disappointment maybe, or worry. "He is that. Charming, funny, good-looking, everything I'm not." Clara frowned, puzzled by the sudden tension in his voice. "Elias?" But Luke returned then, cutting off whatever she might have said. He poured fresh coffee for everyone and settled back into his chair with a satisfied sigh. "So, Clara, I have to ask, what made you answer that advertisement? Montana Territory is about as far from Baltimore as a person can get without leaving the country. Most Eastern ladies wouldn't even consider it." "Most Eastern ladies have better options," Clara said. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "I didn't. After my parents died and I lost everything, I could either marry a man I didn't love or find my own way. The advertisement promised good pay and honest work. That was enough." "Brave choice," Luke said, "or possibly crazy. I haven't decided which yet." "Perhaps both," Clara allowed, smiling slightly. "Definitely both," Elias muttered, but his eyes were warm. They talked late into the evening, long past when Clara should have headed to the stable. Luke regaled them with stories from town. Apparently he was courting the school teacher, a woman named Sarah, who had strong opinions about grammar and weak knees for Luke's dimples. Elias contributed occasional dry observations that made Clara laugh. And Clara, feeling more relaxed than she had in months, found herself sharing memories of her parents, stories from her childhood, small pieces of herself that she usually kept locked away. Finally, reluctantly, Clara checked the watch pinned to her dress. "I should go. It's nearly 8, and I need to start my rounds." "I'll walk you," Elias said immediately. Luke raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just smiled into his coffee cup in a way that suggested he knew something Clara didn't. Outside, the night was cold and clear, with a million stars scattered across the black sky. Clara's breath made clouds in the air, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Elias walked beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you for tonight," Clara said. "Your brother is wonderful. You're both wonderful. I haven't felt this welcome in a long time." "You are welcome," Elias said quietly. "More than you know." They reached the stable and Elias opened the door for her. The interior was warm and dim, lit by the single lamp Clara had left burning. The horses nickered softly at their arrival, familiar now with her nighttime presence. "Clara," Elias said, and something in his voice made her turn to face him. He stood in the doorway, backlit by starlight, his face shadowed but his eyes visible, intense and uncertain and full of something that made her heart race. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have said before, but I didn't know how, or if I even should. But Luke thinks I'm being an idiot, and maybe he's right. And, Elias, Clara stepped closer, drawn by the raw vulnerability in his voice. Just say it. He took a breath. I put that advertisement in the newspaper last October, after the summer breeding season was done and I knew I'd need help with the spring foaling. I thought I was just looking for a competent ranch hand, someone reliable and skilled, but when I wrote the advertisement, something made me add the words good pay and room included. I told myself it was just to attract better candidates, but the truth is, he paused, seeming to gather his courage. The truth is, I was hoping for someone like you, someone who needed a new start, someone who'd see this place the way I see it, not just as a job, but as a home. Clara's breath caught. Elias, wait, let me finish. He stepped closer, and Clara could see his face now, could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. When you walked into that saloon, when I saw you standing there with your worn coat and your proud eyes and your chin lifted like you were daring the world to break you, I knew. I knew you were the one I'd been waiting for, not just to watch the horses, but to... He stopped, shook his head. I'm not saying this right. What I'm trying to say is... The sound of hoofbeats cut through the night, fast and urgent. Both Clara and Elias turned toward the noise. A rider was approaching the ranch at a gallop, pushing his horse hard through the darkness. Something's wrong, Elias said, instantly alert. He strode out of the stable, Clara following close behind. The rider pulled up in the yard, his horse lathered and blowing hard. Clara recognized him. Tom, one of the ranch hands who worked the north pasture. His face was pale in the starlight. Boss, Tom shouted, swinging down from his horse. We got trouble. Rustlers hit the north herd. They got away with maybe 20 head, and they shot Pete when he tried to stop them. Elias went very still, his face hardening into something cold and dangerous. How bad is Pete? Shoulder wound. He'll live, but he needs a doctor. We got him back to the north camp and stopped the bleeding, but I'll ride for town, get Doc Miller. Elias was already moving toward the stable where his horse was kept. Luke, he shouted toward the house. Luke, get out here! Luke appeared at a run, taking in the scene instantly. What happened? Rustlers. Pete's shot. I'm going for the doctor. Elias was saddling his bay gelding with swift, economical movements. Take the men, track those rustlers, but don't engage unless you have to. I want them caught, but I want everyone safe more. Understand? Understood. Luke was already heading for his own horse, shouting orders to the ranch hands who were emerging from the bunkhouse. Clara stood frozen, watching the controlled chaos, feeling helpless and afraid. Elias swung into the saddle, his face grim, and for a moment Clara thought he would just ride off into the night without another word. But he paused, his eyes finding hers across the yard. Clara, he called, watch the stable, watch the mares, don't leave them unguarded. I won't, she promised. But Elias, be careful. Please. Something in his expression softened. I will. I promise. Then he was gone, his horse's hooves throwing up dirt as he galloped toward the road to town. Luke and 6 ranch hands thundered off in the opposite direction, toward the north pasture where the rustlers had struck. Within minutes, the ranch was quiet again, empty except for Clara and the nervous energy crackling in the air. Clara stood in the yard for a long moment, her heart pounding, her mind racing. Then she turned and walked back into the stable, back to the mares who depended on her, back to the job she'd been hired to do. The confession Elias had been building toward, whatever he'd been about to say before they were interrupted, would have to wait. But as she made her rounds, checking each mare, noting their conditions in the log book, Clara couldn't stop thinking about his words. I knew you were the one I'd been waiting for. What had he meant by that? Just someone to help with the ranch or something more? And why did the possibility of something more make her heart race and her hands tremble? She'd come west looking for independence, for a job, for freedom from men who saw her as property. She'd promised herself she wouldn't be foolish enough to fall for the first kind man she met, wouldn't confuse gratitude with deeper feeling, wouldn't risk her hard-won independence for anything. But Elias Cade wasn't just any man. He was complicated and quiet and burdened by ghosts, yes, but he was also steady and honorable and surprisingly gentle. He'd given her work and shelter without asking anything in return except her skill and dedication. He'd shared his table, his home, his brother. He'd looked at her not like someone to be saved or conquered, but like someone worthy of respect. And when he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, she felt something she'd thought died with her parents. The possibility of belonging to something again. Not in the way women were supposed to belong to men, as possessions, but in the deeper way that two people belong to each other when they choose it freely. "I'm being foolish," Clara whispered to Sage, who'd come to the stall door looking for attention. "I barely know him. It's only been a week. I can't possibly—" Sage snorted softly, as if disagreeing. Clara laughed despite her worry. "What do you know about it? You're a horse." But horses, Clara had learned long ago, often understood things that humans missed. The way Sage looked at her with those calm, wise eyes suggested the mare knew exactly what Clara was feeling and wasn't judging her for it at all. The night stretched on. Clara walked her rounds, tended to the mares, kept the fire in the small stove burning. But part of her attention was always turned toward the darkness beyond the stable walls, listening for the sound of returning horses, praying that Elias would come back safely. It was nearly 3 a.m. when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Clara's heart leaped, and she rushed to the stable door. Elias rode into the yard, his horse tired but not lathered. Behind him, moving more slowly, came a wagon driven by a heavy-set man Clara assumed was the doctor. The wagon rumbled past the stable, heading toward the north pasture, and Elias swung down from his horse. Clara met him at the door. "Is Pete?" "He'll be fine. Doc says the bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. He'll be laid up for a few weeks, but he'll recover." Elias's voice was hoarse with exhaustion. "Luke and the men caught up with the rustlers about 5 miles out, ran them off, recovered most of the cattle. Looks like they were from that gang that's been working the territory, the Jackson brothers and their crew." "Did anyone else get hurt?" "Few scrapes and bruises, but nothing serious. Luke's bringing everyone back now. They should be here within the hour." Elias ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly deflated. Could have been so much worse. If Pete had been a better shot, or if those rustlers had been meaner, we could be burying someone tonight instead of just patching them up. Without thinking, Clara reached out and touched his arm. "But you're not. Everyone's safe. You got the doctor in time. Luke recovered the cattle, and nobody died. That's what matters." Elias looked down at her hand on his arm, and when he raised his eyes to her face, Clara saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "When I was riding to town, all I could think about was what I'd said to you before Tom arrived. How I'd started to tell you something important, and then I didn't get to finish. And I thought, what if something happens to me? What if I don't get another chance? What if you never know?" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Clara, I need to tell you something I should have said from the beginning." "All right," Clara said softly. Her hand was still on his arm, and she could feel the tension in his muscles, the rapid beat of his pulse. "I'm listening." "I started building a cabin last April," Elias said, the words coming in a rush now, as if he'd held them back too long. "Out in the North Meadow, where the aspens grow thick and the wildflowers bloom in spring. It's not finished yet, just the frame and part of the walls. I've been working on it in my spare time, a little bit each week. Luke keeps asking why I'm bothering, who it's for, and I couldn't answer him because I didn't know. I just knew I needed to build it, needed to create something that wasn't this ranch, or my father's legacy, or my mother's memory, something that was mine, that I was making for the future, not the past." Clara's heart was hammering. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because when you walked into that saloon, when I saw you for the first time, I knew." His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm. "I knew that cabin was for you, for someone like you anyway. Someone strong and brave and not afraid of hard work. Someone who'd see this valley the way I see it and love it the way I love it. My mother, before she died, she made me promise I'd find someone to share this life with. She said she didn't want me to spend my years alone just because I was afraid of losing again. And I promised her I would try, but I didn't know how. Until I wrote that advertisement, until you came, until—" "Elias," Clara interrupted gently, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying I've been waiting for you since spring," Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm saying that cabin in the meadow is meant to be our home, if you'll have it, if you'll have me. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know you came here for a job and not a husband, but Clara, He took a shaking breath. I think I'm falling in love with you. And I needed you to know that before another moment passed and something else tried to steal the words from me. Clara stood frozen, her mind reeling. A week ago, she'd been alone and desperate, with $3 to her name and no future beyond survival. Now here was this quiet, complicated man telling her he was building her a home, telling her he loved her, offering her everything she'd thought she'd never want again. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything yet, Elias said quickly. I don't expect an answer right now. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that you're not just an employee to me. You've become... He struggled for words. You matter, Clara. You matter more than I know how to express. Clara looked up at him, at his weathered face and storm-gray eyes, and the hope and fear tangled together in his expression, and felt something inside her that had been frozen for so long begin to thaw. She thought about the past week, about the easy comfort of their dawn conversations, about the way he'd smiled when she'd successfully delivered her first foal, about how he'd looked at her tonight in her green dress like she was something precious. She thought about the cabin he was building in a meadow she'd never seen, about a future she hadn't dared imagine. You matter to me too, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect that. I came here thinking I'd keep my heart locked away, that I'd never risk it again, but you've been so kind, so patient, so steady. You make me feel safe in a way I haven't felt since my parents died. And that terrifies me because I don't know if I can survive losing that feeling again. You won't lose it, Elias said fiercely. I won't let you. Hoofbeats interrupted them again, Luke and the ranch hands returning from their pursuit of the rustlers. The moment shattered, reality crashing back in. Elias stepped back reluctantly, releasing Clara's hand, but his eyes held hers for one more heartbeat. We'll talk more, he said, when things are calmer. But Clara, think about what I said, please. Then he was striding across the yard to meet his brother, to hear the full report, to handle the crisis that had temporarily derailed everything. Clara watched him go, her hand still tingling where he'd held it, her heart full of confusion and possibility, and something that might have been hope. She returned to the stable and tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept circling back to Elias's words. A cabin in the meadow. A future. Love. The very things she'd told herself she didn't want, presented in a way that made them seem not like chains but like wings. Dawn came eventually, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Clara had just finished her final rounds when Elias appeared, looking exhausted but satisfied. Everything's settled, he said. Pete's resting comfortably, the cattle are back in the north pasture, and the sheriff's been notified about the Jackson gang. Luke thinks they won't try this ranch again. We made it clear we won't be easy targets. That's good, Clara said. She wanted to ask about their interrupted conversation, wanted to tell him she'd been thinking about his words all night, but the moment didn't feel right with other ranch hands moving about and the morning routine beginning. Elias seemed to understand. Get some rest, he said softly. We'll talk tonight before your shift, just you and me without interruptions, all right? All right, Clara agreed. She walked back to her cabin as the ranch came to life around her, and for the first time since she'd lost everything, Clara Whitmore allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just survival. A future that included love and partnership and a home built in a meadow full of wildflowers. Whether she had the courage to reach for that future was a question she'd have to answer soon. But for now, she let herself hold the possibility close, fragile and precious as a newborn foal taking its first uncertain steps toward life. Clara didn't sleep that morning. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling beams, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through her windows, her mind churning with everything Elias had said. I've been waiting for you since spring. The words echoed in her head, both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. She'd come west to escape the trap of marriage, to find independence and freedom. But what Elias was offering didn't feel like a trap. It felt like something else entirely. A partnership. A choice made freely rather than born of desperation. Finally, giving up on sleep, Clara rose and washed her face in cold water. She braided her hair with trembling fingers and put on her work dress, the sturdy gray wool that could withstand stable work. If they were going to talk tonight, she wanted to be clear-headed and honest, not drowsy and vulnerable. She wanted to know her own mind before she faced him again. The afternoon passed slowly. Clara tried to read from her mother's Bible but couldn't focus on the words. She attempted to mend a tear in her other dress, but pricked her finger 3 times and gave up. Finally, she wrapped herself in her shawl and walked down to the creek that ran along the edge of the ranch property, needing the sound of moving water to quiet her racing thoughts. The creek was half frozen, ice clinging to the banks while the center ran clear and quick. Clara sat on a large boulder and watched the water flow, thinking about currents and how they carried things forward, whether you were ready or not. She'd been carried here by grief and necessity, by loss and the desperate need to survive. But now she was being offered something else, a chance to stop merely surviving and start actually living again. The question was whether she had the courage to take it. "Thought I might find you here." Luke's voice made her jump. He was standing a few yards away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unusually serious. "Mind if I sit?" "It's your ranch," Clara said, making room on the boulder. "It's Elias's ranch, technically. Our father left it to both of us, but Elias is the one who really runs it. I just cook and handle supplies and try to keep him from working himself to death." Luke settled beside her, his long legs stretched out before him. "He told me what happened last night. What he said to you." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "He shouldn't have." "Don't be embarrassed. I already knew anyway. I've known since the day you arrived, and I saw how he looked at you." Luke picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek. "Elias isn't good with words, Clara. He keeps everything locked up inside. Thinks he has to be strong and stoic all the time, because that's what Pa taught him. But I've watched him for 5 years now, watched him grieve and struggle and slowly hollow himself out trying to keep this ranch running and honor our parents' memory. And then you showed up, and for the first time since Ma died, I saw him smile. Really smile, not just that polite thing he does for show." "Luke, I don't know if I can be what he needs," Clara said quietly. "I don't know if I can be what anyone needs. I'm still figuring out how to be what I need for myself." "That's fair," Luke said, "and I'm not here to pressure you or tell you what to do. You've got every right to say no, to keep things professional, to protect yourself. God knows you've been hurt enough already." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I want you to know something about my brother. When Elias loves something, he loves it completely. He doesn't do anything halfway. Our father was like that too, all or nothing, no middle ground. It's what made Pa a great rancher but a difficult man to live with. Elias is gentler than Pa was, more thoughtful, but he has that same capacity for absolute devotion." "That sounds like a warning," Clara said. "Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just information you should have before you make your decision." Luke stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "That cabin he's building, he started it the week after Ma died. Spent 3 years on it, working whenever he could spare the time. He told everyone, including me, that it was just a project to keep busy. But I knew better. I knew he was building it for someone specific, even if he didn't know who she was yet. He was building it on faith that someday someone would come along who'd make all this—" He gestured at the valley, the mountains, the vast Montana sky. "Worth sharing." Clara's throat tightened. "And he thinks I'm that person?" "He knows you are." "And Clara?" "I think so too." Luke smiled gently. "Whatever you decide, you'll still have a job here, still have a place on this ranch. Elias would never use your employment as leverage, but if you can find it in yourself to trust him, to trust this, I think you might find what you came west looking for." He walked away before Clara could respond, leaving her alone with the creek and her thoughts and the weight of a decision that felt too big for one person to carry. As the sun sank toward the western peaks, Clara made her way back to her cabin. She changed into her green dress again, the one that had made Elias's breath catch the night before, and let her hair down, brushing it until it shone. She wanted to look like herself when she faced him, not like someone trying to be something she wasn't. If they were going to have this conversation, she needed to do it honestly. The knock came at precisely 6 o'clock. Clara opened the door to find Elias standing there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt the color of storm clouds. He held his hat in his hands and looked as nervous as Clara felt. "I thought we could talk while we walk," he said. "If you're willing, I want to show you something." "All right," Clara said, reaching for her shawl. They walked together through the ranch yard and past the stables, heading north toward a part of the property Clara hadn't yet explored. The evening air was cold and sharp, scented with pine and coming snow. Neither of them spoke, but the silence felt companionable rather than awkward, as if they both understood that some conversations required the right setting. After about 20 minutes, the path opened into a meadow that took Clara's breath away. It was nestled in a natural bowl of land, surrounded by aspen trees whose bare branches caught the last golden light of day. Even in late winter, with the grass brown and patches of old snow lingering in the shadows, Clara could imagine how beautiful this place would be in spring, carpeted with wildflowers, alive with birdsong, perfect and private and peaceful. In the center of the meadow stood the frame of a cabin. It was larger than Clara's current cabin, maybe twice the size, with solid log walls already halfway completed and a stone chimney rising against the darkening sky. The roof beams were in place, waiting for shingles. Windows were framed but not yet filled. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and Clara could see where Elias had carefully leveled the ground and laid a foundation that would last for generations. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed. "It will be, when it's finished." Elias led her closer, his hand resting lightly at her back. "I've been working on it for 3 years, like I said. Slow going when you're doing it alone and running a ranch at the same time. But I didn't want to rush it. I wanted it to be perfect." They stepped up onto the porch, and Elias pushed open the door. Already hung and fitted, Clara noticed, smooth on its hinges. Inside, the space was open and full of possibility. Clara could see where the main room would be, where a kitchen would fit, where a bedroom could be partitioned off. The fireplace was complete, beautifully crafted from river stone, and someone had left a stack of wood nearby as if anticipating the day when flames would warm these walls. "I've got plans for shelves there," Elias said, pointing, "and a proper stove for cooking, big windows on the south wall to catch the light and warmth, a loft upstairs for—" He stopped, cleared his throat, "for whatever might be needed." Clara walked slowly through the space, trailing her fingers along the smooth log walls. She could feel the care in every detail, the love poured into each carefully fitted joint. This wasn't just a structure. It was a promise made solid, a future carved from timber and stone and hope. "Why are you showing me this?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because I want you to see what I'm offering," Elias said. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the fading light, his face serious and vulnerable. "Not just a job, not just a place to sleep, but a home, Clara. A real home. Built for you. Built for us, if you'll have it." Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Elias, I barely know you. We've known each other less than 2 weeks." "I know, and I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not even asking you to decide right now." He stepped inside, closing the distance between them. "I'm just asking you to consider it, to think about what we could build here. Not just this cabin, but a life, a partnership, something real and lasting and worth fighting for." "I told myself I wouldn't do this," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I promised myself I wouldn't fall for the first man who showed me kindness, that I'd be smart and careful and protect my heart." "And you should protect your heart," Elias said gently. "You've been hurt enough." "But Clara—" He reached out, hesitated, then gently cupped her face in his calloused hand. "What if protecting your heart means letting someone worthy guard it alongside you? What if being smart and careful doesn't mean building walls so high that nothing can reach you, but choosing carefully who you let inside those walls?" Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. "What if I'm not brave enough? What if I say yes and then lose you too, like I've lost everyone else? I don't think I could survive that again." "You wouldn't lose me," Elias said fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere. This ranch, this valley, this life, it's all I know and all I want. I'm not a man who walks away from what he loves." "You can't promise that. No one can. My parents didn't choose to leave me. Your parents didn't choose to leave you. Death doesn't ask permission." "No, it doesn't." Elias's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a gesture so tender it made Clara's breath hitch. "But that's exactly why we have to live while we can. Why we have to take chances on things that matter. My mother told me that before she died. She said, 'Don't waste your years being afraid, Elias. Fear is just another way of dying slowly.' and she was right. Clara opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the lines around his eyes from squinting at sun and wind, the scar along his jaw from some long-ago accident, the silver threading through his dark hair at his temples. She saw a man who'd known loss and kept living anyway, who'd built something beautiful in the wake of grief, who was offering her not a rescue, but a partnership. "I need time," she said finally. "Not months, not even weeks. Just a little more time to be sure, to know that what I'm feeling is real, and not just gratitude or loneliness or the relief of not being alone anymore." "Take all the time you need," Elias said. "I'll wait. I've been waiting since spring. A few more days or weeks won't make a difference. And if I decide I can't," Clara forced herself to ask, "if I decide that I need to stay independent, that I'm not ready for this, what then?" "Then you keep your job, keep your cabin, keep working nights in the stable for as long as you want. Nothing changes except that I'll know where I stand and can stop hoping for something you can't give." His voice was steady, but Clara heard the pain beneath it. "I'd rather have you in my life as a friend and employee than not have you in my life at all." The honesty of it, the simple dignity of his answer, nearly undid her. "You're a good man, Elias Cade." "I try to be." He smiled slightly, though my brother would probably argue that good and stubborn as a mule aren't mutually exclusive. Clara laughed despite the tears threatening to spill over. "Your brother is right about a lot of things. He usually is, unfortunately. Makes him insufferable." Elias stepped back, breaking the intimate moment before it could pull them both under. "Come on. I should get you back to the stable before your shift starts. Starlight is getting close. I think tonight might be the night." They walked back through the gathering darkness, not touching, but close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of him beside her. The stars were emerging overhead, brilliant and countless, and Clara thought about how different the sky looked out here compared to Baltimore. Bigger, somehow, more full of possibility. At the stable door, Elias paused. "Clara? Thank you for listening, for not dismissing this out of hand, for giving me a chance." "Thank you for being patient," Clara said, "for understanding that I need time to trust this." "Take all the time you need," he repeated. Then impulsively, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, brief and gentle and full of restrained tenderness. "I'll see you at dawn." Clara watched him walk away, her hand pressed to where his lips had touched her skin, feeling like the world had tilted on its axis and would never be quite the same again. She turned and entered the stable, greeted by the familiar sounds of horses settling for the night. But tonight, everything felt different. The mares she checked seemed to eye her with knowing expressions, as if they could sense the change in her. Even Starlight, who came to her stall door and nuzzled Clara's shoulder, seemed to be offering encouragement. "You think I should say yes, don't you?" Clara murmured to the beautiful gray mare. "You think I should trust him." Starlight blew softly through her nose, and Clara took it as agreement. The night deepened. Clara made her rounds, noting that Starlight was indeed showing signs of imminent labor. Pacing restlessly, her belly dropped low, small beads of sweat forming along her neck despite the cold. Clara logged the observations carefully and settled in to watch, positioning herself where she could see into Starlight's stall while still keeping an eye on the other mares. Around midnight, Starlight lay down. Clara moved closer, her heart beginning to race. This was the mare that mattered most to Elias, the living connection to his mother. If anything went wrong, but Starlight was calm, her labor progressing naturally. Within an hour, Clara saw the water break, saw the first glimpse of tiny hooves. She held her breath, barely daring to move, as the mare pushed and rested, working with the ancient rhythm that needed no human intervention. The foal slid into the world just after 1 in the morning, a filly, pale as her mother, with a tiny star on her forehead. Clara cleared the membrane from her nose, rubbed her chest to stimulate breathing, and felt a surge of joy when the filly gasped and then began breathing steadily. Starlight turned immediately, nickering to her baby, licking her clean with devoted attention. The foal was perfect, long-legged and delicate, with her mother's elegant bone structure and intelligent eyes. Within 20 minutes, she was struggling to her feet, wobbling but determined. By 2 o'clock, she was nursing contentedly while Starlight stood guard, radiating maternal pride. Clara knew she should log everything, should complete her documentation, but first she needed to do something else. She ran across the ranch yard to the main house, her breath making clouds in the cold air, and knocked on the door where she knew Elias's room would be. He answered within seconds, fully dressed despite the late hour, as if he'd been unable to sleep, as if he'd been waiting. "Clara, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Clara said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Everything's right. Starlight foaled. You have a filly, Elias. She's perfect. Your mother would be so proud." Elias's face transformed. Joy and relief and something almost like grief flashed across his features. "Can I see her?" "That's why I came to get you." They hurried back to the stable together. Elias stopped at Starlight's stall, his hands gripping the top of the door, and just stared. The filly was lying in the straw now, her sides rising and falling peacefully, while Starlight stood over her protectively. "She's beautiful," Elias whispered. "Look at her, Clara. She looks just like Starlight did when she was born. Same coloring, same build." His voice broke slightly. "Ma would have loved her." "What will you name her?" Clara asked softly. Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Hope," he said finally. "I'll name her Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for the future. Hope that beautiful things can still come from loss. Hope that—" He turned to Clara, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Hope that new beginnings are possible." Clara felt something inside her chest crack open, all the careful walls she'd built around her heart crumbling like they were made of nothing but sand. She looked at this man who'd waded through grief to find joy again, who'd built a home on faith that someone would come to share it, who'd just named a full hope because he still believed in tomorrow, despite everything yesterday had taken from him. And in that moment, Clara knew. She knew with a certainty that felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding solid ground after months of drowning. She knew that she loved him, not because he'd rescued her or because she was grateful, but because he was worthy of being loved, because he saw her as an equal and a partner, because when she looked at their future together, she didn't see a cage. She saw wings. "Elias," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "ask me again." He turned to face her fully, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Clara said, ask me again," she repeated. "About the cabin, about the future, about us." Elias took her hands in his calloused palms warm and solid against her fingers. "Clara Whitmore, will you build a life with me? Will you let me love you, not as someone to be saved or possessed, but as a partner and equal? Will you share this valley, this ranch, this crazy, beautiful, difficult life, and make it ours together?" Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but for the first time in over a year, they were tears of joy rather than grief. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you." The kiss that followed was everything Clara had never known she wanted, gentle but passionate, tentative but certain, full of promise and possibility. Elias's hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Clara wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, letting herself feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Truly sure? Because once you say yes, I'm never letting you go." "I'm sure," Clara said. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They stood together in the quiet stable, surrounded by sleeping horses and new life, and Clara thought about how far she'd traveled, not just the miles from Baltimore to Montana, but the distance from despair to hope, from isolation to belonging, from simply surviving to actually living. "When?" Elias asked. "When should we— do you want a proper courtship? Time to plan a wedding? I don't want to rush you." "I don't need a long engagement," Clara said. "I've already lost enough time to fear and grief. But I'd like the spring. I'd like to marry you when the meadow is full of wildflowers, when the cabin is finished, when everything feels new and possible." "Spring," Elias agreed. "I can finish the cabin by then. Luke will help. He'll be thrilled, honestly. He's been lecturing me about my stubborn solitude for years." He smiled, that real smile that made him look years younger. "We'll do it right, Clara. I'll court you properly, take you to town dances, Let everyone know you're spoken for. And in the spring, we'll stand in that meadow and make promises in front of God and everyone we know." "I'd like that," Clara said. She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders, and watched as starlight's filly, as hope, stirred in her sleep and then settled again, dreaming whatever dreams newborn horses dream. They stayed like that until dawn, talking quietly about plans and dreams and the future they were building together. They talked about finishing the cabin, about where they'd put furniture, about how many children they might want someday. They talked about the ranch and the horses, and whether Clara would keep working the night shift after they married, or whether they'd find someone else and she'd work alongside Elias during the day. "I'd like to keep working with the horses," Clara said. "Maybe not every night, but I don't want to just be a rancher's wife. I want to be a rancher too, a partner in all of this." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Elias assured her. "This ranch needs both of us, and honestly, you're better with the mares than I am. They trust you faster." As pink light began to flood the valley, Luke appeared at the stable door, took one look at their faces, and grinned so wide Clara thought his face might split. "Well, it's about damn time," he said. "I was beginning to think you two were going to dance around each other until the snow melted. When's the wedding?" "Spring," Elias said, unable to keep the smile from his voice. "And you're making the food." "Obviously I'm making the food. Who else would you trust?" Luke came forward and pulled Clara into a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. "Welcome to the family, Clara. Fair warning, we're all a little crazy, but we love hard and we're loyal to the bone." "I can work with that," Clara said, laughing through happy tears. The day that followed was a blur of joy and exhaustion. Clara finally slept for a few hours, then woke to find Elias at her door with wildflowers he'd somehow found despite the late winter cold. They had lunch with Luke, who was already planning the wedding feast and driving them both crazy with his enthusiasm. In the afternoon, Elias took Clara back to the meadow, and they walked through the cabin together, making plans and dreaming out loud about the life they'd build there. That evening, before Clara's shift, they rode into town together. Elias wanted to do things properly, wanted to tell people that Clara Whitmore was going to become Clara Cade, wanted the world to know that the woman who'd answered his advertisement had become the answer to prayers he'd barely dared to speak. The town reacted exactly as Clara expected, with surprise, speculation, and eventually genuine happiness. The women in the general store clucked and cooed over Clara's news, offering advice and help with wedding preparations. The men congratulated Elias with knowing grins and backslaps. The minister, a kind man with more humor than judgment, agreed to perform the ceremony in the spring and offered his church for the reception if the weather turned bad. As they rode back to the ranch in the purple twilight, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in over a year: lightness. The heavy weight of grief and fear that had pressed on her chest for so long had eased, not disappearing entirely, but becoming bearable. She had mourned her losses and survived them. Now she was being given the chance to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. "Happy?" Elias asked, reaching across the distance between their horses to take her hand. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But yes, happy too." "Good, because Clara, you've made me happier than I thought I'd ever be again. You came into my life like a gift I didn't know I'd been waiting for, and now I can't imagine any future that doesn't have you in it." Clara squeezed his hand, holding tight to this good man who'd been brave enough to hope, who'd been patient enough to wait, who'd been wise enough to see in her not a woman to be saved, but a partner to walk beside through whatever came next. The ranch appeared ahead of them, lights glowing warm in the gathering darkness, and Clara thought about how the word home meant something entirely different now than it had just 2 weeks ago. Home wasn't just a place anymore. It was this valley, these horses, this man, this life they were choosing together. It was hope, reborn in the deepest cold of winter, promising that spring would come again. The weeks that followed their engagement passed in a rhythm that felt both dreamlike and utterly real. Winter began its slow retreat from the valley, the days growing incrementally longer, the snow melting to reveal brown earth that would soon burst with green. Clara continued her night shifts in the stable, watching over the remaining mares as they foaled one by one, each birth a small miracle that never lost its power to move her. But now, when dawn came and Elias arrived to relieve her, Their greetings included stolen kisses and whispered plans, and Clara would return to her cabin with her heart so full it sometimes felt like it might overflow. Elias courted her with a quiet devotion that made Clara fall deeper in love with him each day. He brought her wildflowers that he rode miles to find, the first brave blooms pushing through the last patches of snow. He carved her a box from cedar wood to hold her mother's watch and her father's pen, the lid inlaid with a pattern of stars that matched the Montana sky. He took her riding through the valley on Sunday afternoons, showing her secret places he'd discovered as a boy, a waterfall hidden in the pines, a meadow where elk gathered at dusk, a cliff face where ancient peoples had painted stories in ochre and ash, and every few days they would walk to the meadow cabin together, watching as Elias and Luke worked to finish what had been started in hope and would now be completed in certainty. The walls rose higher. The roof was shingled against spring rains. Windows were fitted and sealed. Clara chose paint colors for the interior, warm cream for the walls, deep blue for the shutters, and Elias built her shelves exactly where she wanted them, asking her opinion on every detail as if her thoughts were treasure. Luke was delighted by the whole situation, taking credit for their happiness with shameless enthusiasm. "I knew from day one," he'd announced to anyone who'd listen at the Rusty Spur Saloon. "The moment she walked in here, I told Elias, 'That's your woman right there.' And was I right? Of course I was right. I'm always right about these things." "You told me no such thing," Elias would mutter, but he'd be smiling as he said it, and Luke would just laugh and order another round for the house in celebration. The town of Willow Bend embraced Clara as one of their own once word spread of the engagement. The women included her in their quilting circles and church socials, sharing recipes and stories and the kind of practical wisdom that helped people survive in hard country. The men tipped their hats to her respectfully, and the children waved when they saw her in town. Clara, who'd felt so alone for so long, found herself part of a community in a way she hadn't experienced since her parents died. But it was Sarah, the school teacher who'd captured Luke's heart, who became Clara's closest friend. Sarah was a transplant too, from Philadelphia originally, with quick wit and kind eyes and a refreshing directness that Clara appreciated. They met for tea at Sarah's small house near the schoolhouse, and Sarah listened to Clara's fears about marriage and independence with understanding. "Luke asked me once why I came west," Sarah said, pouring more tea into Clara's cup. "I told him the truth. I came because in Philadelphia, being a school teacher meant being a spinster, meant giving up any hope of marriage and family because society said I couldn't have both. Out here, things are different. Harder in some ways, yes, but freer too. You can be a wife and still be yourself. You can love a man and not lose your identity to him." "That's what Elias promises," Clara said, "but I'm still afraid. What if is the question that keeps us all from living?" Sarah interrupted gently. "Clara, I've watched you with him. I've seen how he looks at you, not like property, not like a prize he's won, but like a partner he's grateful to have found. That's rare. That's precious. Don't let fear steal it from you." Clara took the words to heart, letting them ease the last lingering doubts that sometimes woke her in the dark hours before dawn. March gave way to April, and the valley transformed. The meadow grasses pushed through the thawing earth, tender and impossibly green. Wildflowers began their ascent. First the hardy mountain flowers that could brave the cold, then the delicate blooms that waited for true warmth. Aspens leafed out in tender green, and the creek ran high and wild with snowmelt from the peaks. The ranch came alive with new foals learning to run, with cattle grazing the fresh grass, with birds returning from their southern migrations to claim territories and build nests. And the cabin was finished. Elias had worked on it with fierce determination through the final weeks, often laboring past sunset by lamplight, driven by the need to have it ready for their wedding. Luke helped when he could, as did several ranch hands who'd grown fond of their quiet boss and his eastern bride-to-be. They installed a beautiful iron stove for cooking, built a bed frame from pine, and fitted it with a real mattress ordered from town, hung curtains that Clara had sewn herself from fabric Sarah helped her choose. On a Sunday in mid-April, Elias took Clara's hand and led her to the meadow. The aspens were fully leafed now, their branches whispering in the warm breeze. Wild flowers carpeted the ground in waves of color, purple lupine, yellow arrowleaf balsam root, pink shooting stars. white yarrow. It was so beautiful it made Clara's throat tighten with emotion. The cabin stood at the heart of it all, no longer a promise, but a reality. Smoke curled from the chimney. Luke had come ahead to start a fire, and the windows gleamed clean and bright in the afternoon sun. "It's done," Elias said simply. "It's ready for you, for us." They walked inside together, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes at what she found. The main room was furnished with the table and chairs Elias had built during the winter, a rocking chair placed near the fireplace. The shelves she'd requested already filled with books that Elias had quietly collected, novels and poetry and practical guides to ranching and horse breeding. The bedroom held the new bed piled high with quilts, a wardrobe for their clothes, a small desk by the window where Clara could write letters or keep ranch records. But it was the small details that undid her completely. A vase on the table held fresh wildflowers. Her mother's Bible sat on the bedside table, her father's pen beside it. Above the fireplace hung the photograph of her family, carefully framed, given a place of honor in their new home. "You brought my things," Clara whispered. "They belong here," Elias said. "Your past, my past, our future, all of it belongs here together. This isn't just my home that I'm letting you into, Clara. It's ours, built for both of us." Clara turned and kissed him, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude and love and wonder she felt. When they finally broke apart, Elias was smiling that real smile she loved, the one that transformed his whole face. "Marry me here," he said. "Not in town, not in the church, but here in this meadow, with the wildflowers and the mountains, and everything that matters to us. Let this be where we start our life together." "Yes," Clara said. "Yes, absolutely yes." The wedding was set for the last Saturday in April. Clara had protested at first that 3 weeks wasn't enough time to prepare, but Sarah had laughed and said, "Clara, this is Montana territory, not Baltimore society. All you need is a dress, a minister, and people who love you. Everything else is just decoration." So Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and only needing minor alterations to fit. The cream-colored silk was simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and sleeves, and wearing it made Clara feel like her mother was with her in spirit, blessing this new beginning. Sarah wove wildflowers into Clara's hair, and Luke's Sarah loaned her a pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, checking off the something borrowed tradition. The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm, the sky an endless blue unmarred by clouds. Clara woke in her cabin for the last time, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Sarah arrived early to help her dress and calm her jitters, chattering about the beautiful weather and the fact that Luke had been up since dawn cooking enough food to feed the entire county. "He's nervous too," Sarah confided. "He wants everything to be perfect for you and Elias. I found him at 4 this morning, frosting a cake and muttering about whether the chicken would be moist enough." Clara laughed, her nerves easing. "Tell him everything will be perfect, regardless of the chicken's moisture content." By noon, people began arriving at the meadow. The whole town of Willow Bend seemed to have turned out. Ranchers and shopkeepers, the doctor and the sheriff, families with children who ran shrieking with joy through the flowers. Ranch hands from Silver Ridge and neighboring spreads came dressed in their Sunday best, bringing gifts of practical household items and warm wishes. Even the stagecoach driver who'd brought Clara to town arrived, presenting her with a silver picture frame and gruff congratulations. The minister stood beneath an arch that Luke had constructed and decorated with pine branches and ribbons. Chairs were arranged in rows facing the arch, but many people simply stood or sat on blankets spread across the meadow grass. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music drifted across the afternoon air, joyful and bright and perfectly suited to the day. Clara waited at the edge of the meadow with Sarah, watching as the guests assembled. She could see Elias standing near the arch with Luke at his side, both brothers in dark suits that made them look impossibly handsome. Elias was scanning the crowd with barely concealed anxiety, and Clara's heart swelled with love for this man who'd been strong enough to wait, brave enough to hope, wise enough to see what they could be together. "Ready?" Sarah asked, squeezing Clara's hand. "I've been ready since the night I said yes," Clara said. The fiddle began playing a traditional wedding march, and the crowd fell silent. Clara stepped into the meadow, walking alone because she had no father to give her away, and because she wanted it this way, wanted to walk toward her future on her own feet, making this choice freely and completely. Every step through the wildflowers felt significant. Every face she passed was smiling, and when she raised her eyes and saw Elias watching her approach with such naked love and wonder on his face, Clara felt the last piece of her broken heart click back into place. She reached his side and he took her hands in his. His palms were sweating slightly. She noticed with tender amusement. This strong, quiet man was nervous. "You look beautiful," he whispered, for her ears alone. "Like something out of a dream." "You look pretty good yourself," Clara whispered back, and was rewarded with a quick smile. The minister cleared his throat and began the ceremony. The words washed over Clara. Traditional vows about love and honor and cherishing, about sickness and health, richer and poorer, all the promises people made when they believed in forever. But when it came time for them to speak their own vows, Clara and Elias had written their own, words that reflected who they were and what they'd found together. Elias went first, his voice steady despite the emotion Clara could see in his eyes. "Clara, when you walked into my life, I was a man who'd forgotten how to hope. I was going through the motions of living without really being alive. You changed that. You reminded me that the future can hold beauty even when the past held pain. You taught me that love isn't something to fear but something to fight for. I promise to be your partner in all things, to respect your strength and your independence, to build a life with you rather than for you. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments but in the hard ones too, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me today." Clara's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them back, needing to see his face clearly as she spoke her own vows. "Elias, I came west looking for independence, for a job, for freedom from a life that felt like a cage. What I found instead was something I didn't know I was searching for. A home, a partner, a future worth building. You've shown me that independence and love aren't opposites, that I can be strong on my own and stronger with you beside me. You've given me space to heal, time to trust, and the freedom to choose this love rather than being forced into it by circumstance. I promise to be your partner in this ranch and in this life, to work beside you rather than behind you, to love you with the same devotion you've shown me. I promise to never let fear steal our happiness, to fight for us the way you fought for me." The minister smiled, clearly moved by their words. "Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, and by the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride." Elias pulled Clara close and kissed her as the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was a kiss full of promise and joy and relief that they'd finally reached this moment. When they broke apart, both smiling through happy tears, Clara looked out at the sea of friendly faces and felt overwhelming gratitude for this community that had welcomed her, for this man who'd waited for her, for this life that was now theirs to build together. The reception that followed was exactly what a Montana Territory wedding should be: loud, joyful, full of good food and better company. Luke's feast was magnificent, and he accepted compliments with barely concealed pride. There was dancing in the meadow as the sun sank lower, couples whirling across the grass while the fiddle played, and children chased each other in dizzy circles. Clara danced first with Elias, who surprised her by being far more graceful than his stoic demeanor suggested, then with Luke, who spun her so enthusiastically she nearly lost her flower crown, then with the dozen other men who wanted to congratulate the bride. As twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the guests began to depart, calling out final congratulations and well wishes. Luke and Sarah were among the last to leave, Luke pulling his brother into a fierce hug. "You did good, little brother," Luke said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ma and Pa would be so proud. I'm so proud." "Thank you," Elias said quietly, "for everything, for believing this was possible when I'd stopped believing it myself." Luke just nodded, too moved to speak, and led Sarah away toward the ranch house where they'd stay the night, giving the newlyweds privacy in their new home. Finally, Clara and Elias stood alone in the meadow as the first stars began to appear. The cabin glowed with warm lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney, waiting for them. "Mrs. Cade," Elias said, testing out the name. "How does that sound to you?" "Strange," Clara admitted. "But good strange. like putting on new clothes that will eventually feel like they were made for you. Elias laughed and swept her up in his arms, carrying her toward the cabin despite her surprised shriek. Then let's go break in our new life properly. He carried her across the threshold and set her down gently in the middle of their main room. The fire crackled cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Their belongings were mixed together now on the shelves, his books beside hers, her mother's Bible next to his father's old journals, two lives intertwined into one. "I love you," Clara said, the words coming easily now, no longer frightening. "I love you, and I'm so glad I took the midnight job at your ranch. So glad I answered your advertisement. So glad I was brave enough to say yes to this." "I love you too," Elias said, cupping her face in his hands. "And Clara, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that bravery." They stood together in the home he'd built with hope and she'd filled with love, and kissed as the Montana stars wheeled overhead and the future spread before them like the meadow in spring, vast and beautiful and full of wild, wonderful possibility. The years that followed were not without their challenges. The ranch faced hard winters and dry summers, market downturns, and the occasional bout of disease among the livestock. Clara and Elias had disagreements about everything from horse breeding strategies to whose turn it was to wake up with their crying babies. There were losses, good horses who died too young, friends who moved away or passed on, struggles that tested their strength and their commitment. But through it all, they held to the promises they'd made in the meadow that April afternoon. They worked side by side, true partners in every sense. Clara became known throughout the territory as one of the finest horse breeders in Montana, with a particular talent for working with difficult mares. Elias expanded the ranch's operations, always consulting Clara on major decisions, valuing her insight as much as his own. Together they built something stronger than either could have created alone. 3 years after their wedding, Clara gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Grace after Elias's mother. 2 years later came a son, whom they called James after Clara's father. The children grew up running wild through the meadow, learning to ride before they could write, falling asleep to stories of how their parents met and fell in love. Luke married Sarah the year after Clara and Elias wed, building his own cabin in the valley and raising 4 boisterous children who were constantly underfoot at Silver Ridge Ranch. The two families were inseparable, sharing holidays and helping with harvests, the children growing up more like siblings than cousins. On their 10th anniversary, Elias and Clara returned to the meadow where they'd married. The wildflowers were in full bloom again, just as they'd been that first April. Their children were with Luke and Sarah for the night, giving the couple rare time alone. They walked through the flowers hand in hand, no longer young but not yet old, marked by a decade of hard work and deep love. Clara's hands were calloused from ranch work, her face tanned from hours in the sun. Elias had more gray in his hair now, and lines around his eyes from squinting at horizons and smiling at his wife. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I showed you this meadow?" Elias asked, "when the cabin was just a frame?" "I said I needed time," Clara recalled, "that I was afraid of losing you like I'd lost everyone else." "And do you still feel that way?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I'm still afraid sometimes," she admitted. "Fear doesn't just disappear because you're happy, but I've learned that love is worth the risk of loss, that 10 years of joy with you is worth whatever pain the future might hold, that being brave enough to love you was the best decision I ever made." Elias pulled her close, kissing her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day and every day since. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if you hadn't answered that advertisement? If you'd stayed in Baltimore or gone somewhere else or just given up?" "But I didn't," Clara said. "I came west. I took the midnight job at a cowboy's ranch. I was unaware he'd been waiting for me since spring, but somehow, in ways I'll never fully understand, I was exactly what he needed. And he was exactly what I needed too." "We were lucky," Elias said. "We were brave," Clara corrected. "Luck is finding each other. Bravery is choosing each other, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, even when the sensible thing would be to protect yourself from potential pain. We were brave, Elias, and that made all the difference." They stood together in the meadow as the sun set and the stars emerged, and Clara thought about the girl she'd been 10 years ago, desperate, grieving, convinced she wanted nothing more than independence and isolation. That girl couldn't have imagined this life, couldn't have believed that love could be partnership rather than possession, that home could be a person as much as a place, that the midnight shift watching horses could lead to a dawn filled with family and purpose and deep, abiding joy. She'd come west searching for independence. Instead, she'd found freedom, the freedom to choose love without losing herself, to build a life that honored both who she'd been and who she was becoming, to create something beautiful from the ruins of what she'd lost. "Thank you," Clara whispered against Elias's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "For what?" he asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For waiting, for building this life, for loving me in a way that made me brave enough to love you back." "The pleasure has been entirely mine, Mrs. Cade," Elias said, and Clara heard the smile in his voice. "Every single midnight, every dawn, every moment in between. It was worth the wait. You were worth waiting for." They walked back to their cabin as the Montana night settled around them, the windows glowing with lamplight, their children's laughter echoing in memory through the walls. The stables held the descendants of starlight and hope, generations of horses carrying forward the legacy of a mare who'd symbolized new beginnings. The ranch thrived under their combined stewardship, the land responding to the love and care they poured into it. And in the meadow, the wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze, eternal witnesses to the truth that some journeys end exactly where they're meant to begin, that some love stories start with a job advertisement and a desperate woman brave enough to answer it, that some cowboys wait through winter for the spring that will bring them home. Clara Cade closed the door of the cabin she'd once feared to hope for, wrapped her arms around the husband she'd once thought she didn't want, and smiled at the beautiful, complicated, perfect life they'd built together, from courage and wildflowers and love that had been worth every midnight they'd kept watch for it. The stars wheeled overhead, the mountains stood eternal, and in a meadow in Montana territory, hope bloomed perennial and true, reminding anyone who cared to see that even in the darkest winter, spring always comes for those brave enough to wait for it.